The air hung thick and humid, heavy with the cloying scent of wilting flowers and the nervous buzz of 1,000 whispered conversations. My smile felt painted on, stiff and brittle, a thin shield against the suffocating tension that coiled in my gut. Around me, the bleachers groaned under the weight of proud parents, grandparents, siblings, all eyes fixed on the sea of identically capped and gowned figures down on the field. One face shone brighter than all the others, luminous with triumph and the pure, unadulterated joy of accomplishment. My daughter. My world. Every beat of my heart was a drum against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with dread. He sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the unfamiliar stiffness in his posture, the cool distance radiating off him like a personal frost. His eyes, usually so expressive, were flat, unreadable. A stranger in the seat next to mine, sharing this monumental moment, yet miles away. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the chasm that had grown between us, but the air felt too thin, the distance insurmountable. It had been building for months, this silence, this polite estrangement in the same house. We were two planets orbiting a dying star, our shared light source flickering out, held together only by the gravitational pull of the vibrant young woman walking across the stage. Her name was called. The crowd erupted. My hands flew up, joining the applause, tears blurring my vision, tears of pride, yes, but also tears of sorrow for the fractured image of the family cheering for her. She found us in the crowd, her smile blinding, and in that moment, for her, I almost believed we were a whole unit. Almost. That brittle shield threatened to shatter. He applauded too, a measured, detached sound next to my fervent celebration. He didn't look at me. He kept his gaze fixed on her, a proprietary air I suddenly found sickening. He had a captive audience, not just of the graduation ceremony, but of my desperate hope that he wouldn't ruin this day. A foolish hope, I knew even then. The dread deepened, a cold stone settling in my stomach. This was not just a graduation. This was a precipice. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before the before felt like a quiet harbor. Not necessarily exciting, perhaps, but safe. Predictable. We built our world around her, our daughter. Our days were marked by school events, piano lessons, soccer practice, homework battles, and the slow, steady rhythm of family dinners. He was a successful man, admired in his field. I ran our home, volunteered at her school, nurtured our small garden. We weren't the couple at parties who finished each other's sentences or held hands across the table, but we were a unit. Solid. Or so I told myself. My desires were simple. Her happiness, her security, a comfortable, quiet slide into old age together, watching her build her own life. The house was filled with the ghosts of her childhood, the walls echoing with laughter and whispered secrets. It was a life built brick by painstaking brick, a fortress of normalcy against the chaos of the world. I had given myself over to it completely, poured all my energy, all my dreams, into the foundation of this family. There was a comfort in the routine, a sense of purpose. We had plans, vague, comfortable plans of travel once she was gone, of downsizing, of quiet evenings on the porch. It wasn't passionate, perhaps, but it was ours. Or so I believed. The first cracks were subtle, like hairline fractures in the foundation you only notice when the light hits them just right. He started working later. Business trips became more frequent, sometimes announced last minute. He was more distracted, his phone a constant companion, clutched tight, face down on surfaces. When I asked about his day, the answers were vague, clipped. When I reached for his hand, it felt heavy, unresponsive. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was a void, charged with unspoken words and growing resentment. I blamed work, stress, the natural evolution of a long marriage settling into comfortable routine. I made excuses, filled the silence with my own chatter, busied myself with the garden, with planning our daughter's future. Anything to avoid looking too closely at the widening gap between us. Anything to maintain the illusion of our quiet harbor. He became a ghost in his own home. His presence felt more in his absence, the lingering scent of his cologne, the impression left on the sofa cushion. We were sharing a house, a daughter, a history, but not a life. Not anymore. The predictability I cherished had become a cage, and I hadn't even realized I was trapped until the bars started feeling cold and hard against my skin. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening, watching the automatic sprinklers water the lawn, the gentle hiss a stark contrast to the roaring silence inside the house. It was a perfect facade, the manicured lawn, the well-kept home, the successful marriage, hiding a parched, dying core. The plans for the future felt like fairy tales I was telling myself to fall asleep. They held no reality, no warmth. Then came the graduation day, the day that was supposed to be solely about her, a celebration of 18 years of dreams and hard work culminating in this shining moment. We sat there, the three of us, a tableau of the perfect family unit for the cameras and the casual observers. He had arrived late, rushing in just as the ceremony began, smelling faintly of something that wasn't his usual cologne, something sweet, floral, expensive. I didn't ask. I couldn't. My voice felt lodged in my throat. The air vibrated with unspoken things, with the weight of years of neglect and turning away. My daughter, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around us, beamed, waving when she saw us, a pure, bright light in the heavy air. She was graduating, moving on, stepping into her future. I clung to that thought, that hope, that her brightness could somehow eclipse the darkness I felt gathering around me. The speeches dragged on, a blur of platitudes and proud pronouncements. Parents took turns at the microphone, offering congratulations, advice, recounting anecdotes. He was scheduled to speak last as part of the parent association he was heavily involved in, a prominent figure in the community. I had always admired his public persona, confident, articulate, charming. It was a stark contrast to the withdrawn, silent man he was at home. I watched him walk towards the stage, adjusting his tie, the picture of composure. He smiled at the crowd, a practiced, easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stood at the podium, the microphone amplifying the rustle of his suit jacket as he adjusted it. The crowd hushed, expectant. He cleared his throat. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice resonating across the field, calm and clear. A public voice. Not the muted tones he used with me. "It's an honor to stand here today, celebrating this incredible milestone in the lives of our children." He spoke for a few minutes, the usual proud parent fare, acknowledging the hard work, the late nights, the sacrifices. He even looked at me once, a brief, fleeting glance that held nothing. No words, no recognition. Just the acknowledgement of my physical presence next to his daughter. Then he paused. He took a slow breath, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, lingering for a fraction of a second on my daughter in the front row, then settling back on the anonymous faces in the bleachers. The practiced smile tightened almost imperceptibly. The air around me grew colder. I knew, with a sickening certainty that went bone deep, that this wasn't just about congratulating the graduates anymore. "Life is a journey," he said, his voice softening slightly, taking on a more personal, reflective tone. It sounded thoughtful, vulnerable, designed to pull the audience in. "And sometimes on that journey, you reach a point where you realize the path you've been on, the destination you thought you were headed towards, is no longer the right one. For you. Or for those you love." He paused again, letting the words hang in the air. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Parents exchanged puzzled glances. My daughter, from the front row, tilted her head slightly, a frown creasing her brow. My own heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the bleachers, to rewind the last 60 seconds. "Today marks a new beginning for our children," he continued, his voice regaining its public resonance, though laced now with an undeniable edge. "And it also marks a new beginning for me. For my wife." He finally looked at me again, a direct, cold gaze that felt like a physical blow. After much soul-searching, and with a heavy heart, I have decided that the time has come for my wife and I to go our separate ways. The world tilted. The noise of the crowd, the humid air, the bright sunshine, it all blurred into a deafening roar in my ears. He was saying the words, "Here,
now."
at her graduation. The public humiliation hit me first, a hot wave of shame and disbelief that threatened to consume me. All those eyes on me, all those whispered conversations that would follow. He was cutting the final thread of our life together, not in the quiet dignity of our home, but on a public stage, amidst a community of friends, neighbors, colleagues, parents who knew us. He was making an announcement, like a business merger, a fait accompli delivered without warning, without discussion, without a shred of empathy for the woman sitting frozen beside him, or the daughter whose day he was hijacking. He continued speaking, but his words were a jumble of meaningless sounds in my ears. Something about amicable, mutual respect, moving forward, lies. All lies. There was nothing amicable about this. There was no mutual respect. There was just him, wielding a verbal machete, hacking at the very roots of our shared life in front of 1,000 witnesses. My hands gripped the edge of the bleacher seat, my knuckles white. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was a statue, a monument to his callousness, bathed in the harsh light of public scrutiny. This wasn't just leaving me. This was destroying me, or attempting to, in the most public way he could devise. He had chosen her graduation, her shining moment, to announce the dissolution of her family. It was a calculated cruelty I hadn't thought him capable of, even after the long, slow fade of our marriage. He finished his prepared statement, a final platitude about wishing everyone well, about embracing the future. The polite applause that followed felt brittle, uncertain. People didn't know how to react. He stepped away from the podium, looking composed, as if he had just announced a change in company policy, not the end of a marriage. He glanced back at me, a look that said, "There. It's done." A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to refute every carefully constructed lie he had just uttered. But my body refused to obey. The shock was too profound, the setting too public. I was trapped in my seat, exposed, vulnerable, my heart pounding with a mixture of pain, rage, and a chilling sense of helplessness. The next part of the ceremony was the student speakers. My daughter was one of them. As she walked to the stage, my eyes met hers for a brief moment. The shock and confusion on her face had hardened into something else, something fierce, something determined. There was no pity there, no shared vulnerability. There was anger, cold, focused anger, and a spark I hadn't seen before, a glint that sent a shiver down my spine. She didn't look at her father. Not once. She ascended the steps, her cap tassels swaying slightly. She stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. Her gaze swept over the sea of faces, bypassed her father completely, and settled directly on me. Her expression softened, a flicker of connection, of shared understanding passing between us. Then, her jaw set. She began her speech. It was eloquent, poised, everything you would expect from a brilliant, articulate graduate. She spoke about the journey, about growth, about the people who had supported her. She spoke about resilience, about overcoming obstacles, about finding your own voice. Her voice was clear, steady, amplified across the field. It carried weight, conviction. It held none of the nervous tremor you might expect. She seemed older, wiser, than she had just moments before walking across the stage to receive her diploma. She spoke about the future, about building a life based on honesty and integrity. It felt deliberate, every word chosen with precision. My initial shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a growing sense of pride in her strength, mixed with a rising curiosity, a tension knotting in my chest. Where was she going with this? She reached the point where she was meant to thank her family, the pivotal part of any graduation speech. "I stand here today," she said, her voice ringing with emotion, Because of the unwavering support of the people who truly love me." She paused, her eyes finding mine again. A small, almost imperceptible nod. My breath caught in my throat. "My mother," she continued, her voice thick with feeling, "has been my rock. She has taught me strength, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it's hard. She has shown me what unconditional love looks like." The crowd shifted. The focus had swung from her father's dramatic announcement to her heartfelt tribute to me. A subtle defiance in the air. But she wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring. "Graduation is about stepping into the light, leaving behind the shadows," she said, her voice suddenly harder, colder. "It's about building a future based on truth. And sometimes that means acknowledging difficult truths about the past and about the people we thought we knew." She looked directly at her father now. The easy smile was gone from his face, replaced by a look of confusion, then apprehension. He shifted in his seat. "To my father," she said, and the temperature in the air seemed to drop several degrees. The mic picked up every nuance of her tone, not anger, not sadness, but a profound, cutting disappointment. "You just spoke about new beginnings, about going your separate ways with Mom. You chose this public forum to make that announcement. On my day," her voice didn't shake. It was unwavering, a steel rod. "What you failed to mention, however, is why you're going your separate ways. You failed to mention the lies, the deceit, the fact that you abandoned our family emotionally long ago, building a separate life for yourself, a life that didn't include honesty or loyalty." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. All eyes snapped from her to him, sitting frozen in the bleachers. He paled visibly, his mouth opening slightly, no sound coming out. This wasn't part of his script. This wasn't the narrative he had carefully constructed. This was her narrative. Her truth. Unfiltered, unforgiving, delivered on the very platform he had used moments before for his self-serving announcement. "You spoke of paths diverging," she continued, her voice gaining power, ringing with righteous indignation. "My path forward is one of integrity. It's one where I choose to surround myself with people who are honest, who are brave, who don't hide their lives or betray the trust of those they supposedly love." She looked at him, and her eyes were like ice. "You have shown me, Dad, what I don't want in my life. You have shown me that success means nothing without character. You have shown me that breaking a family is easy, but rebuilding trust is impossible when the foundation is built on lies." The silence in the stadium was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the beating of 1,000 hearts. Every eye was on him. He looked stunned, blindsided, completely stripped bare. His public face, the one he wore with such effortless charm, was gone, replaced by a raw, exposed panic. He hadn't anticipated this. He had expected me to crumble, to handle the private fallout, maybe for my daughter to be upset, but not this. Not a public indictment. Not from her. Not here. She drew herself up to her full height, pulling the graduation gown around her like a mantle. "So, while you embark on your new beginning," she said, her voice echoing with finality, "know that my new beginning starts today too. And it starts by choosing a different path. A path that leads away from you. A path that I walk with my mother, who has shown me what real strength is." Her voice broke, just for a second, on the word mother, a flicker of the pain underneath the steel. Then it hardened again. "Effective immediately, consider yourself disowned. You may be my biological father, but you are no longer a part of my life. And you are no longer a part of our family." She didn't look at him again. She turned back to the crowd, her expression one of fierce defiance and heartbreaking resolve. "Thank you," she said simply, and stepped away from the podium. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then built slowly, gathering momentum, wave after wave of sound washing over the stadium. It wasn't just polite applause. It was applause laced with shock, with respect, with a complicated mixture of sympathy for her and condemnation for him. I was on my feet, my own tears now streaming down my face, but these were different tears. Tears of shock, yes, but also tears of awe and fierce, overwhelming pride in my daughter. She hadn't just survived his attack. She had counterattacked brilliantly, publicly, and devastatingly. She had taken his weapon, the public stage, the graduation ceremony, the narrative control, and turned it against him. He was trapped, exposed, the architect of his own undoing. He sat there, amidst the rising tide of applause for his disowning, utterly frozen. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning, standing in the middle of an empty field, smoke curling from his ruined life. The calculated cruelty of his announcement had been met with an uncalculated, devastating truth delivered by the one person he perhaps still believed he held sway over. He had used his daughter's moment to hurt her mother and announce his freedom. She had used her moment to announce his shame and her own freedom from him. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. People avoided looking at him, their faces a mixture of scandalized fascination and awkward pity. He didn't move from his seat until the very end, long after everyone else had filtered out. He tried to approach me, his face contorted, maybe with anger, maybe with some twisted attempt at damage control. But my daughter was by my side, her arm linked through mine, her gaze a silent, impenetrable wall. She didn't say a word to him. She didn't have to. Her speech had said everything. He stood there for a moment, defeated, exposed, then turned and walked away, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the emptying stadium. His power had evaporated under the harsh light of his daughter's truth. He had announced he was leaving us, expecting to walk away cleanly. But she had shown him he wasn't just leaving, he was being cast out. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. Phone calls, texts, shocked whispers. The community that had seen us as a stable couple, focused on our daughter, was buzzing with the scandal. But the narrative wasn't his anymore. It was hers. It was ours. The story wasn't husband leaves wife amicably. It was daughter disowns cheating father at graduation. He lost control of the story, and in losing that, he lost a significant amount of leverage. The divorce proceedings, which had begun with him attempting to dictate terms, assuming I would be too devastated or too ashamed to fight, shifted dramatically. His public exposure, especially within the professional circles he valued so highly, had immediate repercussions. His reputation was tarnished. His leverage diminished. He was no longer the wronged or amicably departing husband. He was the man publicly disowned by his daughter for cheating. That kind of scandal sticks, especially in communities that value appearances. Lawyers who had seemed dismissive initially suddenly took a different tone. We had the moral high ground, and more importantly, we had the public perception shifted firmly in our favor. Evidence I had slowly and fearfully gathered, those late-night texts, the credit card statements, the subtle hints of his double life I had buried my head in the sand to avoid seeing, suddenly felt like weapons I was no longer afraid to wield. The fear I had lived with for months, the fear of being alone, of financial insecurity, of public shame, began to recede, replaced by a cold resolve. My daughter and I became closer than ever. The shared trauma, the shared defiance, forged an unbreakable bond between us. We spent hours talking, processing, crying, sometimes even laughing, a dark, cynical laughter at the absurdity of it all, at his sheer, breathtaking arrogance. She told me how she had suspected for a while, how his distance felt wrong, how she had pieced things together from overheard phone calls and strange behavior. Her speech hadn't been entirely spontaneous. It had been building inside her, a truth she knew she had to speak. She had written parts of it, honing the words, waiting for the right moment. When he took the stage and delivered his cold, public dismissal of our marriage, she knew that was her moment. She didn't just want to defend me. She wanted to defend the truth and to reclaim her own future from the shadow of his deceit. We started rebuilding. It wasn't easy. The house felt too big, too full of memories, both good and painful. The financial separation was complex and stressful, even with the shift in dynamics. There were moments of deep sadness, grieving not just the loss of the marriage, but the loss of the life I thought we had, the potential for a shared future that would now never exist. My daughter grieved too, for the father she thought she had, for the family unit that was now irrevocably broken. But there was also a profound sense of liberation. The constant tension that had permeated our home for years lifted. The need to maintain the facade was gone. We could breathe. We could be honest.
We could be ourselves.
We started making new plans, just the two of us, plans that felt lighter, freer. She chose a university across the country, an opportunity to build her life far away from the wreckage her father had created. I supported her completely. My life, which I had intertwined so completely with his, was now mine to redefine. It was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. He tried to reach out weeks later. Emails, texts left on read. A handwritten letter, returned unopened. He tried to use intermediaries, family members, friends. The message from us was clear, delivered through his lawyer. Any communication must go through legal channels. The personal door was closed.
Permanently.
He had made his choice, and he had heard the consequences, delivered by his own daughter on the brightest day of her young life. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost his daughter, his reputation, his carefully constructed image. He had tried to control the narrative, to emerge from the marriage looking strong and decisive. Instead, he emerged looking pathetic, exposed, and alone. My daughter left for college in the fall, packing her car, saying goodbye at the airport. It was bittersweet, the natural progression of life mingling with the unnatural circumstances that had accelerated her departure, hardened her resolve. We hugged for a long time, silent understanding passing between us. She had fought for me, for us, in a way I never could have imagined. She had given me the strength to stand tall when I felt ready to collapse. Standing in my quiet house after she was gone, the silence felt different from the silence of the years before. It wasn't a void filled with unspoken resentment and fear. It was a space waiting to be filled, a blank canvas. There was sadness, a lingering ache for the family we had lost, the future that wouldn't be.
But there was also peace.
A profound sense of peace that comes from facing the truth, speaking the truth, and standing firm in the face of betrayal. He thought he was ending my life as I knew it, leaving me adrift. He didn't realize that in doing so, he was giving me the chance to start a new one on my own terms, stronger, wiser, and finally, truly free. The battle was over. The victory was ours. And it tasted like courage. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.